question at all. My name is Robin Simonds. I'm the Director of Information Systems at the University of Connecticut School of Law. My partner is Elmer Masters, Director of Computing at Emory Law School. Today's session is an attempt to talk in somewhat more general terms, perhaps, than you'll see in other sessions here, about the issues of managing law school IT. Elmer and I have both been IT managers for quite a number of years now. I think between us we have 17 years of experience spanning 6 schools. Now, if you do the math, that's not an encouraging statistic, and that's certainly one of the problems that we will at least touch upon today. Part of what inspired this session was a series of ongoing discussions over the years on the Technoids listserv that typically sprang out of a series of questions that we would see from time to time, which would generally come in the form of somebody would post a message to the list and say, would everybody please tell me how many law school staff you have, how many FTEs, how many computers do you have, how many wires do you have, how many fiber optic lines, how many servers, how many's, and I or Elmer or others would, at various times, depending on how rotten our day had been, pop off and say, what are you asking irrelevant questions for? That doesn't have anything to do with it. How many doesn't matter. Well, where we're coming from in that is that each law school is unique. We're all the same in many ways, and yet we're all different in many ways. And I think our complaint, if you will, has been that the kinds of questions that we periodically see completely fail to acknowledge the uniqueness of each institution and the why behind the answer to the how many questions. And we think this uniqueness is a tricky beast to try and identify. So we're going to come at it from the perspective of IT managers who've had to deal with the uniqueness and talk about some of the things we've had to deal with and some of the things that we think are important in managing an IT operation in whatever law school you happen to be. So with that, I will turn the podium over to Bill.
Thank you. Actually, we've got kind of we're going to switch on and off quite a bit as we move through different things here. So we've got it's going to be kind of a tag team thing. So we'll see how this works. A little bit about knowing your law school's culture and how things really work. There. One of the major things that happens, I think, when those questions get posted about, how many people do you have doing this and that sort of thing, that tends to get under our skin sometimes is that because every law school is unique, it doesn't really make any difference how many people I had working under me at Cornell versus how many people are working at law school X. And the thing is that every organization is unique, so you don't need to, you can certainly look at those kinds of things and make some comparisons based perhaps on size of faculty and size of student body, but in a lot of ways it has to do with just what's going on in your organization. Now, and there is a lot going on there that you need to know about. I tend to refer to the whole thing as kind of an organizational culture. Okay, so what is going on in your law school, and that includes formal and informal things like policies and procedures, social hierarchies, all that sort of stuff. Who's keeping you from getting at or is helping facilitate the movement of information and those kinds of things. And so every organization has this culture, and depending on how the culture has grown up over time is really what's going to determine how IT is going to have to function in that environment. Now, the unique culture is usually embraced, I say, because there's always some people who don't buy into it anyway, but generally by most of the staff and faculty, they know how, they've been there for a while, they know how the organization works, They've bought into the system, so to speak, and they keep things moving along. Now, as sort of a big, broad generalization that may bother some people, culture at law schools tends to be stagnant. And that might sound a little harsh, and maybe it is, but the thing is that law schools are by their nature conservative beasts, or so it seems to me. Although I get a sense in today and in the past few months or so that might be starting to change. It's a good thing. But self-examination and change in law schools is a slow process. So it takes a long time for a law school to decide that it needs to be something different, or it needs to change the way that it works. There we go. Now, IT, information technology, is different. Right? We live in a culture of change. Right? You can't change fast enough, it seems sometimes. And sometimes I want to dig in my heels, even being the IT guy, and say, okay, enough of this already. I just want to do this, and I want to be kind of left alone for a while. But there's a lot of change. And we're used to a culture of change, and we're more accustomed as information technology professionals to change than law schools are as a whole. When I recently changed positions and left Cornell and went to Emory, when I told my father-in-law, who's VP of Human Resources in a big company, he said, the problem with you IT guys is that you're loyal to the technology and not the organization. And so you're always moving around. And I said, well, okay, but, it's all right. He was absolutely right. We have an entirely different culture. And just the way that we think about things and the way that we look at things and the way that we're used to things changing and stuff. And it's very, very different from the traditional law school sort of slower-paced culture. So when you bring IT into your law school, you get a culture clash, right? We want to change a lot. They don't want to change at all, or they want to change slowly. And you need to manage that change. And that's very, very hard, very, very hard thing to do. Because you really need to work really hard at that. And one of the big things that you need to do is you need to then learn the culture of the law school. Now, as Robin said, we've moved around quite a bit. So, as we've gone from one place to another, we've had to learn the culture and, learn how to work with that culture to make, to make the changes that we would like to make, or that we think that should be made, or in some cases, the changes that we were hired to make, even though, we don't necessarily, you get brought in and they say, we want you to do this. And then they put you in a room, and then you turn around and you're all by yourself. And there are a lot of very mean-looking people there, but you still go with what you need to do. But to learn the culture, you sort of need to, turn off your computer, get out of your office, and wander around the building. Right? Which actually I've been at Emory 7 days, and I haven't really ventured out of my office yet, other than to the coffee machine down on the other side of the floor. Mostly because I've been unpacking boxes and sort of getting settled in, and I knew that I was coming here, so I didn't want to sort of start anything and then finish the conversation by saying, well, I'm going to be out of the office for a while, and I'll see you when I get back. But when I get back, one of the things that we'll be doing is getting out and about and seeing who's still around for the summer and learning what's going on. But it's important to do that. And then the other thing is to then, once you've looked around at what's going on in law school, learn, who's, who's on first and who the people are that are, controlling the information and what the kind of social pecking order is and those sorts of things, is to then, change the way that the culture that IT is bringing into the organization subtly change it to adapt to the culture of the institution, so that you can look at bringing change in based on, you already know what's going on in the organization, and you can sort of put on your systems analyst hat sometimes and look at the way things are working, and bring in some of the IT things into the organization and say, here's something that we could do that can make things work a little bit better. And a lot of that has to do with things like setting priorities and stuff, and we'll actually talk about that in a little bit. Okay. Now I'm flipping this back over to Robin. He gets the next point.
Every single job interview I've had in the last 10 years, communication has come up. It seems that communication is a major issue in the relationship between information technology departments and their communities. I would hazard the observation that it may be more of a two-way communication problem than many would allow. It's frequently packaged in the form of IT does not communicate with us. But this is the way it's handled, and this is what's handed to you when you become a manager of an IT department, and this is what you have to deal with. Communication and with it, consensus building are tremendously important to the success of IT in a law school across the board. First, in the most basic sense, it's essential to building user trust and cooperation. I think all of us who've been in this business a while certainly have learned, either by observation or the hard way, that if the user base does not trust you, they sure as heck aren't going to cooperate with you. And if they don't cooperate with you, you're not going to get very much done. And that's just the way it is. So you've got to build trust and cooperation. You've got to make it a priority to go out and persuade your community that you really do care about them, that you're there for a purpose, that you know what that purpose is, and that they can safely rely on you to do your job so that they can do their job. Not necessarily an easy matter. Some cultures make it difficult for IT organizations to be trusted, and other cultures are a little bit easier. But you have to go out and try. With that, you have the whole issue of perceptions of the work of IT staff. And really, the first two things go together, because user trust is often based on their perception of you and what your work is and how you're doing your work. And you have to actively manage that perception. You can't sit and do HTML code and assume that the rest of the world is accurately perceiving the goodness of your work. You have to take a much more active role in managing perceptions of what you do and why you do it, so that those perceptions are positive and help fuel trust and, of course, cooperation. And finally, communication is essential to building consensus and partnerships within the community. And I'm going to talk some more about consensus and partnership, but I think that those two things are critical to successful IT management in virtually every law school in the country. Now, there are various kinds of communication. Having experienced a number of different schools and having worked with a number of different IT staffs in various situations, I've discovered that sometimes the problems are very basic. Sometimes you have things that are as basic as what I call my no-brainer, which is giving timely and useful advice of IT activities, including how it's going to affect people's work. So, for example, you don't take down a server without first telling people you're going to do it. That's a really big faux pas, and I've met a few people over the years who don't understand that particular point. And secondly, even though it may be obvious that if your server is down, you can't log in, you still got to tell them anyway. They may not get that point. I mean, after all, you are dealing with a population who are not computer experts, who do not understand that the word memory does not necessarily encompass both hard drive space and random access memory in the same sentence. And for whom a lot of technical terms and technical concepts are foreign and, quite frankly, not particularly interesting. And so you've got to take it upon yourself in the communication process to flesh this out for them, to let them know what it means when you say your server is coming down, or you're replacing a hub in a building, or whatever it is that you're going to do. Another thing is sort of similar to the first point, but perhaps a little subtler, is letting people know what's going on when there are problems, even if you're letting them know after the fact. So, for example, if something crashes, you need to, when all is said and done, you know, obviously when you have a major crash, you're going to be worrying about that crash, you're going to be fixing the problem, you're not going to be doing a whole lot of communicating at that moment. But when you're done, you need to let your people know what happened, what you did to fix it, and that everything is okay. It's not enough to say, well, the system crashed, didn't they get it? That's not enough. You have to do more than that. And it's not necessarily because they really want to know the gory details. You know, oftentimes technology is a lot like making sausage. The end result may be lovely, but you sure as heck don't want to watch the process. But at least you wanted to make the effort to let people know, to communicate. And it's as much, I think it's as much a touchy-feely thing as anything, if I may put it in those terms. It's letting people know that you are a participant in the community, that what you do does matter to them, and that you know it, and that you care about that fact. Another kind of communication is information about technology issues. This is something that my folks do a great deal of. When, for example, over the weekend, this last weekend, we had the latest in a series of international virus scares. The first thing that we were doing Monday morning was setting out notices explaining, first of all, what it was, what they didn't need to worry about, and what they should worry about. Very routine kind of thing, but it goes a long way to helping foster good relationship with your community and building the kind of trust and cooperation that's absolutely essential. And then finally, there's the broadest form of communication of all, which is what I call the ongoing dialogue about needs and ideas. And that's really what, part of what Elmer was talking about when he talked about getting out there and talking to people and seeing what's going on. You have to do this on a constant, ongoing basis, because you are, in effect, engaged in a dialogue about what's going on at the school, what people are doing, what's important, what's not, what's interesting, what's new. And you have to be a participant in that dialogue, and you draw from that dialogue a tremendous amount of information that will help you shape IT policy. And the other participants in the dialogue will draw a tremendous amount of information about what you're thinking, what you can do for them, and how all this can fit together. But there are certainly some communication pratfalls that I've encountered over the years. One of my favorites is what I call larding up the message with jargon and technical trivia. Most people don't know what a gigapop is, except maybe a new product from Good Humor. Most people don't know what TCP/IP is. One of the things that I have done over the years, and certainly worked for me, and I think it can work for a lot of people, is develop communication techniques that are plain language. So I consciously avoid the use of technical terms except when I have to use them. And then I explain them to make sure that my audience is hearing me and understands what I'm saying. And I don't do it in a condescending sort of way. I keep it very straightforward and very simple. But, you know, for example, if you're going to replace a hub and you need to announce this fact, it's not necessary to say that you're replacing your Cableton EMMA-E3 with a Cableton Smart Switch 1040/R, whatever. All it's necessary to say is that you are replacing a core piece of equipment that manages network communications for the school. Simple language, to the point. Don't waste people's time, but don't assume that they're going to know all the jargon and acronyms. Actually, one of my favorite, now very old jokes is the joke about what PCMCIA really needs, and I think it's one that we should all remember, which is people can't memorize computer industry acronyms. And it's a good one to remember. So don't bother. Don't ask other people to remember those acronyms and what they mean. Instead, give them the information in a form that they can really use. Another common pratfall that I've seen over the years is announcing a change, executing the change, and before you do it, failing to mention that there might be some problems that will come out of the change. I think it's better to say it's going to rain and it just might flood than it is to say, oh, we're going to have a little sprinkle and all is going to be well. Because if it floods and you've announced a sprinkle and it floods, you're in deep trouble. If you've announced a flood and it sprinkles, you're a miracle worker. So keep that in mind. Similarly, don't make promises and then fail to deliver. Never announce you're going to do something unless you're ready to actually do it. That's a mistake I've seen made in more shops than I can imagine. It's a credibility issue. People don't want to know what you're thinking about, especially, though it can be useful to talk about what you're thinking about. But they want to know what you're going to do today, tomorrow, and next week and next month. And they want to know that when you announce something, you tell them something, that you're serious. So, my philosophy is I work out the problems before I make an announcement. At my shop, we're bringing up a new mail system. We've been working on this for 9 months, something like that. And but we didn't announce it until a month and a half ago, when we knew what the solutions to the problems were. We still had a few things we hadn't solved, but we were 90% there, and that was where we needed to be. And that way, when we announced it, we could announce everything. We announced how we were going to take care of any particular problems we could anticipate, what all the dates were going to be, the issues the community needed to think about. And, as a matter of fact, we're ahead of plan, as it turns out, which is lovely place to be, and that hasn't always happened. But at least by the time the community knows about a major change, we've got all the pieces in place, and we're ready to move in the fashion that we announced that we're going to move. And I think that's, again, an important piece of credibility and an important piece of building trust in the community. Finally, failing to respond to feedback. Now, a lot of people might think that responding to feedback means answering an email message. You send something out and somebody sends back a response and you respond to the response. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something a lot more subtle, which is listening to the feedback and thinking about it and crafting a broad response in what you do that takes the feedback into account. It's important to remember that answering a question is only the beginning of a process. It's how that question should, if it's an interesting question at all, or an interesting objection at all, it should actually tell you something about what people are thinking. And if you think about that, you can craft a better response for your department. You can take into account things you hadn't thought about. You can use this as a valuable feedback loop, if you will, in technical terms, that will help you do a better job. Out of communication, we want to build consensus. And that, in fact, is the ultimate object of good communication, is to build the confidence in IT and consensus for IT activities and priorities. Consensus is important for a number of reasons. First of all, consensus is an important mechanism of the law school's culture. I mean, much of what law schools do, they do by internal consensus. And it's important that IT recognize that and work within that system. On a more specific level, it validates your strategies, and it ensures that the things that you do are the right kinds of things for your community. And it's also important that IT staff recognize that it is IT's responsibility to go through the processes that help build consensus. That doesn't mean you don't elicit help. You do elicit a lot of help, actually. But you have to make it your responsibility to see to it that you get consensus so that you can function and get your job done. But of course, consensus is a rather slippery thing. In academia is unique in many ways. As many an IT person who's come from commercial work and gone into academia has discovered, all is not exactly as it appears to be. Truth number one about consensus, though, is that the perception of consensus governance is essential in the academic setting. At the very least, people have to think that what's going on is being done by consensus. With that is truth number two, that all other things being equal, perception is more important than reality. Truth number three is IT people find this very annoying. So what are we talking about? What kind of consensus? Obviously, if every single thing you did required a consensus movement, you would probably not accomplish very much in any one lifetime. So I like to think of consensus in academia as really a process that you manage. Consensus is not of itself an outcome, however, because consensus changes as time goes by, as new things happen, as new possibilities emerge. What people want, need, what they think they want, need is going to change. And so it's really a dynamic kind of thing. And you just have to think of it as something that you're constantly engaged in and constantly trying to manage. And the most important kind of consensus is consensus about needs and directions and goals. In fact, I think it's necessary. And if you're carrying on this ongoing dialogue about needs and ideas, consensus should evolve from that process. So the two go hand in hand. It's also important to realize that consensus requires a perception of participation, not universal consent. I seriously doubt you could get a bunch of academics together in the room and get them to agree on the time of day, much less anything else. And that's okay, because academics don't really expect to agree on everything. What they really want is to be asked. That's the most important thing. So how do you go about building consensus? Well, first you do a good job with your basic communication. From there, you have to find out within your culture, who are your consensus leaders? There's always one or two or five individuals in any group who are, in effect, the consensus leaders. They are the people whose voice is the loudest, if you will. And you need to find out who these people are, and you need to build a relationship with them. Casual conversations are really important. You shouldn't float every idea in a message to everyone. Instead, you should be floating ideas with individuals over lunch, in a casual conversation in office. Part of that's just good relationship building. Part of it is trying to get in a non-threatening, informal setting feedback. And you have to listen, of course, to what other people are saying, because you're going to get better ideas, and the ideas that evolve from that process will go forward. You need to be a salesman. And you have an idea or something you want to do, you need to sell that idea. But you need to sell it to individuals, your consensus leaders and others, before you try to sell it to the group as a whole. And finally, you are going to get unfavorable responses. But that's okay. Consider that part of the process of refining ideas, of putting together strategies that really work. And use those unfavorable responses as tools with which to do this refining and to develop strategies that actually can move you forward. But of course, the devil's in the details. And implementation decisions can rarely be the subject of consensus. And frankly, it's been my experience that if you have engaged the community and you have earned their trust, then quite frankly, they're going to say, oh, you worry about the details. That's okay. And that's where you want to be. If you get that response, you're really on the money, because you're the person who has the technical knowledge to actually run an implementation and to make the kinds of decisions that make implementations work. Most of the other people in the community just don't have the knowledge. And so long as they trust you, that's going to work well. If they don't trust you, then they're going to attempt to substitute their incomplete knowledge for your complete knowledge, and that is just plain disaster. So when it comes to implementation, I think you have to think of yourself as taking the lead, and you have to really focus on that and make it happen.
Back over to me. One thing, if anybody has any questions, because then we don't have to stop. So if you have any questions at any point, just feel free to jump in. Now, once you've learned the culture and you've worked on communication and consensus, you still need to be setting your priorities. You still need to know what you want to do, how you're going to go about doing it, and what sort of things are important. And there are actually just a kind of a few priorities when you really sort of stop and think about it, and they all sort of need to kind of follow from one another. To me, the biggest priority in terms of information technology is infrastructure. You know, people will disagree with that. That's fine. But if you don't have a good infrastructure, if you don't have a good base to build things on, you aren't going to be able to do anything anyway. Okay, and so infrastructure should be a major priority. Okay, and by infrastructure, I'm talking about staff, so people in place to do the things that you need to do with technology. Networks, actual hard physical wiring in the walls, and your network infrastructure in terms of servers and mail systems and messaging systems and those sorts of things. And PCs, actual desktop hardware, okay, printers, scanners, whatever else you'd like to sort of include in that kind of hardware area. All that's your infrastructure, and you've got to get all of that right before you can really start building on other things. But exactly what all of that will be is going to depend on what the culture of your law school is. Okay, your law school may have a big no-bell network that's been around for forever. Okay, and you know you're going to have to work with that because changing it to something else is going to be way too painful, and you know may not be something that you want to necessarily do. There might not be any networking in place, or a minimal amount of networking. Or people may be using the same PCs that they've had for the last 7 years. You know, all those sorts of things go in. For staffing, you may be a one-person shop, and you know, trying to support 200 PCs scattered in 3 buildings or something like that. And you need to address those sorts of issues, and they need to be made a priority first before other things can get done. The next thing is communication. Now, some people will put communication above infrastructure, but I think infrastructure is more important because without the infrastructure can really facilitate the communication part. I mean, it saves you from having to run from office to office and talk to people all the time. You know, you want to do that sometimes. But communication helps you with managing the flow of information because there are tons of it and it's all over the place, and you know somebody needs to sort of rein it in and have a handle on it. But all these things need to go along with the institutional goals and priorities. Right? Your law school needs to know what it wants to do, and that's kind of a big question because a lot of law schools don't know what they want to do. And in terms of technology, they'll look at the IT person and say, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And that's a trap. Because you're going to lose a leg in there. You can't, you know, when somebody asks you that question, a lot of alarm bells should be going off. Because yes, you're the expert, and yes, they should want to know what you're doing, or what you think they should do. But it shouldn't be one person asking you that question in sort of a vacuum, as in, well, we'll do whatever you want to do. I mean, I don't know all the things that, you know, are possible or that an institution might want to do. So it's important to have some sort of planning process in the organization. And that's a difficult thing. But a lot of, you know, schools have faculty, law schools have faculty committees for lots of stuff. And some people cringe at the notion of a faculty committee for IT. And in some faculties, they probably have good reason for doing so. But it can be a useful thing in that, you know, the faculty's used to having, you know, they have the curriculum committee and the appointments committee and all these other committees, and they're very involved in what's going on. And so they should be involved in IT. But of course, with IT, you also need to include staff. And, you know, and depending on how your law school is structured, the library, if they're not included with the faculty or the staff in some other fashion, so that you get enough input on IT and so that they know what's, you know, what can go on. But it is very important that those institutional goals and priorities be laid out. And then IT needs to align itself with what those goals and priorities are. Okay, you can't be doing your own thing all the time. It was a lot more fun, actually, when I first started. Because you could do whatever you wanted, because nobody was really paying any attention, and it didn't make a lot of difference. But we were experimenting then, and we're not experimenting. You know, you can't, like Robin said, you can't sort of flip the switch on a server in the middle of the afternoon to do something without telling people about it anymore. We used to do that all the time. But nobody would notice, you know, because they weren't really using the structure. Now, you know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and every freshman on campus is downloading the latest Star Wars trailer. People can't get to Lexus, and they're calling me up, wanting to know what's wrong with our network. And they know now when things are slowing down and when things aren't working. They're a lot more aware of it, even though they don't necessarily admit it or even realize it. The network has become, and the IT infrastructure becomes central to the organization. So IT really needs to line itself up with the institutional priority. And so in doing that, as Robin has said, and which I suppose we really can't stress enough, you really do need to work with everybody, and sometimes that's not an easy job. Because each one of these groups, faculty, staff, library, students, all have their own goals and priorities. Right? They're all doing very different things, but they're all making use of IT services. Right? And you can't treat them all the same. And the other thing that you can't do, you can't treat them all the same, but you can't let any one group know that they're being treated different than another group. So it has to look like you're treating everybody the same, but you really have to be very specialized, because the needs of the faculty are very, very different than the needs of the admissions office. Okay? And in that aspect, actually, one size doesn't fit all, and that's where things start to get a little complicated. But you need to get out and know what the goals and priorities of those groups are a lot of times too, besides just the institutional goals and priorities. And you need to keep those in sight, although I would say that the institutional goals and priorities should have a higher priority. But you need to know what these groups need from you, and kind of keep that in sight as things move along, because these are very, very important things, and any one of these groups you really can't afford to alienate those folks, because they can make your life miserable. Even though, like, some people would sort of short sell students on this because they turn over every 3 years, and so if you do anything bad to students, you just wait a couple of years and they're all gone. But the problem is that that's very true, and so they do bring a lot in, and they have a lot of expectations about technology these days, actually more and more all the time. And it's important to be plugged into what they are doing with technology too, because sometimes you can use that to drive, or at least not drive, but edge the faculty towards adopting some of these technologies. Yes?
Coach also have to now start taking into account student perception of technology, since they're going to be the people who the development office is going to for money when they graduate. And if they were honked off as students because they couldn't get their email, you're going to make the development office a job a lot harder.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if people are leaving with a negative attitude about the law school, no matter what the cause of it was, if it was, and certainly technology, the fact that they can't get their email actually can rank pretty high on that list of things that'll really set them off. But yeah, I could see where it'd be difficult then, to later go back and ask those folks for money, and they'll be, not really interested in donating. So it is important that the students have, that you kind of keep them in mind when you're setting all this up. We're back to Rob again. I get all the short ones.
Differences stuff. Of course, we all have to work with faculty, and I think everybody I've ever talked to in the business has had their share of war stories about it. Faculty are different, and there are reasons for that. Being a teacher in higher education is one of the most independent professions somebody can choose. It's remarkable. About the only thing that's not independent is the class schedule set by the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, and usually if you jump up and down hard enough on that person's desk, you'll get what you want anyway. So it's sort of a different mindset one develops. And I should say, by way of disclosure, that I'm the child of two academics, so I'm familiar with all this in sort of a personal way that perhaps not everybody is. Faculty, because of what they do, have an intensity of intellectual focus. They typically work in very narrow fields, particularly their scholarship, and they're very seriously focused on that. And one of the upshots of that is they are not focused on what you are doing, unless it has some very direct impact on what they are doing, in which case they're very focused on it. And that's important to remember, and important as a part of understanding where faculty come from. They also have a very particular position in what I call the academic caste system. And frankly, academia is a very hierarchical organization that pretends to egalitarianism. And faculty are very near the top of the pecking order. And depending on who you talk to, some might tell you that the dean or president or whatever is actually at the top, and those people might tell you, oh no, the faculty are at the top. It all matters of perspective. And finally, in education, process is a lot more important than anything else, and it makes some sense because education is a process. We're not really teaching anybody anything that's so specific they're going to go out and use it the next day. At least not in law, not in the humanities, perhaps in the sciences, but even there, science has changed so much. That you're really teaching processes. You're teaching how to think, how to learn, how to survive for the next 50 years in your chosen profession. So the needs are pretty obvious as between IT and faculty: communication, mutual understanding, mutual respect, finding common ground, typically with reference to institutional goals, and finally to work in partnership to some degree to further the missions of the institution, whatever those may be. But it's not always that easy, and there are problems. The biggest problem that all of us who are in IT run into is perceptions of professionalism. The caste system very much gets in our way. And certainly we're not the first people to run into this. Librarians as a professional class encountered this decades ago. That when a new profession comes into the law school, there isn't a place for them really, and finding that place has been difficult, to say the least. And as IT people, being the newest profession in the 20th century, soon to be 21st century law school, we are bearing the brunt of the difficulties of finding our place in the caste system. And part of that's fueled by differences in language. IT people speak a different language. We speak in acronyms that sound like Dutch, and we talk about concepts that are unfamiliar to a lot of people. And it's our ability to talk about those concepts that makes us who we are. Law professors are no different. They speak in a very unique language. And I think it's true with all human professions that languages are often the basis of exclusion and definition of the profession. And that gets in our way, frankly, as we try to find our place. There is no clear perception in law schools of what IS careers really are. I mean, the usual answer that you would get if you ask somebody about what IS careers are is, oh, you help fix our computers, right? And that's not what an IS career is. In fact, sometimes you run into this in the damnedest sort of ways. A number of years ago was trying to fill a position, and as is always my habit, I get a cross-section of the community to participate in the interview process and to give me some feedback. Primarily, I want to make sure that the person I hire does not overtly offend too many people all at once. So it's sort of a litmus test. And one time I had a very promising young man as a candidate for a network administrator position. Really had it together. And I definitely wanted this guy. And I thought he'd interviewed well. So at the end of the day, when I called the representative of the faculty group to talk to him to get feedback, the first thing out of his mouth was, oh, he's too ambitious. What? Too ambitious? I don't understand. Explain. Oh, well, when we were talking in the interview, he was talking about how he had a career and that he wanted to advance within the university system. And one day he'll hold the top position. I was floored. That was quite possibly the first time I've ever been speechless. Why would you not hire somebody because they're ambitious? But that was the feedback. It was really extraordinary. And it came from a complete lack of understanding of the broader picture of what an IS career really is. And then finally, of course, there's the perceptions of how IS fits into the law school. That's something that we're working on. We've been working on it for 20 years now. And we're going to be working on this one for a while. So we have to find a basis for partnership somewhere in all this mess. And I think there are some basic techniques. Again, IS people, IT people have to make a lot of effort and try to bring people to the table. And part of what that is you have to engage faculty in a discussion of their needs and interests. I've discovered that if you listen to them long enough, and you ask them enough questions, eventually they're going to get tired of talking about themselves and ask about you, and you have the exact opposite. You have to talk about your work in plain language. I've said this already today. I'm going to say it again. Speak plain English. There's no substitute for it, and if you do it, you're going to go a lot further, and it is crucial to communicating in this environment. And share your ideas. Share your problems and issues. Don't whine. Whining never goes over well with anybody, but people do need to know what your issues are. And if you can learn to explain them in language everybody can understand, you'll get some sympathy and you'll get cooperation. You need to negotiate for professional recognition. This is a tough one because, and this is one we've all been dealing with for a long time. But I think, and I don't think there are any quick fix answers for the issue, but if you can educate folks about what you do and what you care about, what your career is, I think in the long run you're going to get that recognition, and that's a key piece in developing the kind of partnership relationship that we all need. And finally, don't be a doormat. There are a lot of people out there who think that doormats are the archetype of service, and I disagree. I don't think that anybody ever appreciated someone who never said no. Sometimes you have to say no. You don't have the resources, you don't have the time, you just can't do it. But the important thing is that it's more important to know how to say no than it is how to say yes. Anybody can say yes. That's way too easy. Saying no is a process of engaging in dialogue, of explaining where you're coming from, of listening to the other person, and coming to some kind of a resolution about why you can't do something, but maybe agreeing, hey, we're going to hold this one in the hopper and see if we can get to it later. It's more important to spend some time on the no answers than it is on the yes answers. And you have to make partnership. If you want to have partnership with faculty, you've got to make it your priority. Which means you have to be receptive to invitations. We're all overworked, all of us. And it's very easy when someone says, I want to do some new thing, whatever that new thing may be, to reflexively say, oh my God, I don't have time for that. And I think we've all done it at one time or another. And if you understand the process orientation of faculty, one of the things that you start to realize is that at least the first time something comes up, you don't have to say no, really, because it may never get any very far. We're only talking, right? This is just talk. And sometimes the just talk is